by giving you something completely different. For the most part, we try to bring you shows that you may not have seen, may not have even heard about, but if you've been following us for the last couple of Genericons, you'll know that I like drama. I'm a fan of drama, well-rounded characters, engaging stories, things that get me emotionally invested. Which is why I bring you things like Guardian of the Spirit, or Revolutionary Girl Lutna. Really, really good shows with some serious and dramatic themes. The shows I'm about to talk to you about here are not like these shows. I'm here to bring you two shows that I had a lot of fun watching, Dirty Pair and Gunsmith Cats, both shows featuring badass ladies and high-octane adventure. Let's start off with 1985's Dirty Pair, a show that came out the same year that I was born. It follows Kay and Yuri, a pair of special agents working for a galaxy-wide troubleshooting service called the 3WA. That group's a pretty good deal in the future, to the point where their building spells out their initials. First you've got Kay, the outgoing tomboy of the group, who's always armed and ready for action, but lacks a certain subtlety in her work. You also have Yuri, a girl with a softer touch, who tends to be a bit more reserved and thoughtful than her partner, at least most of the time. And together they form a team known as the Lovely Angels. Together they fight space pirates, they infiltrate dangerous hidden bases, they escort visiting royalty, go on ancient treasure hunts in old ruins, and they even fight a plague of hyper-intelligent Nazi rats. You thought I was joking. They also have to contend with Cthulhian horrors from beyond the stars, so as if all of that wasn't enough. And it might come as no surprise then that they tend to bring a bit more force to the situation than is necessary. This leads them to cause a little bit of collateral damage here and there, or a lot of collateral damage depending on the planet. And while it's not always their fault, trouble does seem to follow in their wake. And this earns them a pretty unfortunate reputation. And case in point, in the very first episode, we see the main residential tower of Eleanor City, where our heroes are based, all peaceful and so on. By the end of the very first episode, they have damaged the tower so badly it's left at a perpetual angle for the remainder of the show. And all of this chaos earns them the unflattering nickname, the Dirty Pair, which they take great umbrage with. Now, I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention their supporting side characters, Moogie, a genetically engineered cat creature, who serves as everything from a pilot to a battle mount. And there's also Nanmo, a chipper R2-D2-like robot that helps them out with hacking and so on, and does its best to keep the two of them from getting themselves killed. Now, some of you have probably noticed during these slides that the girls aren't exactly dressed for battle most of the time. Their outfits barely make up a swimsuit between the two of them, so why don't I mind when I am on record as saying I loathe fan service in all of its boom-tastic forms? Remember, if you're like me, you have no time for this kind of garbage. Well, in Dirty Pair, it's played for laughs, not pandering. No one in the show takes it seriously, and we don't get constant glamour shots of our characters' underpants, so it basically becomes passive fan service. And they dress pretty normally most of the time, at least as normally as the 80s allowed, so and no matter how they dress, Kay and Yuri still have a lot of agency and are skilled at what they do. It's their decisions that drive the events. They're self-reliant, they're strong, they're good at reading their competition, and they're smart. And most importantly, they're almost always in control of their own destiny. If you assume these girls are going to be like other anime cliches, then you're going to get what this guy got, suplexed into a pile of rocks. And it's just refreshing to see a team that is not only good at what they do, but love what they do. And they better, because they have to deal with everything from black holes to deadly assassins to the entire police force of one particularly unwelcoming planet, and even outlaw biker gangs on a volcano world populated by fire-breathing dinosaurs. In case that didn't give you the impression, this show rarely fails to come up with interesting things for our heroines to do. And even with all the action and craziness, many of the best moments just come from the dynamic between the two characters. They act like two people who have dealt with the best and worst from one another. They get into fights over food and living space, and they mock each other for relationship troubles that they themselves have caused. But in the end, the two of them trust each other, and they come up as true friends. With everything they've been through, they darn well better. And I've always believed that mutual suffering is where the strongest bonds are formed. And if all of this, if all of my description up until this point hasn't convinced you to give this show a shot, they also feature rocket launcher jetpack fights. And if you can't see the appeal in that, I'm afraid we can't be friends. Let's jump ahead one full decade to 1995's Gunsmith Cardz, a 3-episode OVA set in Chicago during around the same time in actual history. And it's a very well-researched version of Chicago. The creators of the show made multiple trips to the U.S. just to do research and give the show a very authentic feel. And we follow Raleigh Vincent and May Hopkins, a pair of bail enforcement agents, or as they're more commonly called, bounty hunters. Raleigh's the owner of a gun store, and a walking endorsement for the Second Amendment. She is a tough but fair young woman who takes her job very seriously. And her partner is Minnie May Hopkins, who complements Raleigh's gunslinging skills with a love of high explosives and sneaky tactics. Together, they run the titular Gunsmith Cardz gun store, and it is here that they are pulled into a sting operation by a sleazy ATF agent, just as sleazy as he looks, who wants their help busting a sophisticated gun-running ring. As you might imagine, the investigation gets complicated as they get pulled into this very dangerous underground world, and they come toe-to-toe with a dangerous hitman, or in this case, a woman who is just as skilled and dangerous as either Raleigh or May. You have everything that an action show could hope for: gunfights, car chases, explosions, intrigue, romance. Or not so much of the last one, but most of the other ones, so whatever. The show builds up a rivalry between Raleigh and her deadly opponent, Natasha Rodinov, a crazed Russian ex-Special Forces soldier who is skilled, lethal, and above all else, prepared. And the fights between Raleigh and Natasha become the hallmark of the show's second half. But much like Dirty Bear, what really sells this show to me is the dynamic between Raleigh and May. The show uses a lot of banter to help cement their relationship, and in my opinion, a lot of the references and dialogue work better in English than in Japanese, so consider checking out the dub. It does have some of the problems of mid-90s dubs, but it's not bad overall. And the two of them pick on each other all the time, and Raleigh comes off as the fussy big sister to May's irresponsible youth. But the two of them go through plenty of scrapes together, and as before, they're well established to be good friends and partners who trust each other with their lives. And as I mentioned, all of the stuff they have to deal with, sleazy ATF agents, assassins, and so on, the mutual suffering they further cements their friendship better than most shows I've seen before or since. Now, before we wrap up, I would like to mention that while the stories of the show and the manga aren't directly related, there are a bunch of details in the show that allude to the comic. So if you've read the manga, this scene right here would come off as an enormous shout-out to an early story. But fair warning, the manga goes into some pretty grim and potentially troubling details, so I'm not here to recommend that, but it is a very interesting read if you have the time. But the anime itself kind of veers away from much of the source material's more questionable content, so you can enjoy it easily on its own. The show packs its 3 episodes with great action and lots of detail. From the action movie sensibilities that are more in line with 90s Hollywood than most anime, and the lovingly rendered firearms, the beautiful cars, and the city of Chicago itself are all painstakingly crafted. If that sounds like the makings of a good show, then you'll probably enjoy Gunsmith Cardz, because it never takes itself too seriously, but it always makes a point to deliver a high-stakes plot with plenty of thrills and danger to keep you interested. And here is some information on it, which we will be bringing back to you later on in the show. Thank you.
Okay, now with significantly less yelling. Alright, so guys, you all know that to create the bad anime panels we run every year, I sit through astonishing trash. So when I want to pick something that's for the good anime panel, I really look to something that makes me feel good, to kind of counteract all that bad nonsense. I feel good about watching the show. That's not going to really so much happen this time, but I'll tell you what that means. So, I'm going to tell you about... Alright! I'm going to tell you about Black Rock Shooter this time around. Now, Black Rock Shooter is kind of tricky in the beginning. It gives off this impression that it's going to be this gentle show about these 2 girls, Mato Kuroi, and Yomi Takanashi. They're going to become best friends, and Mato's kind of a dork, and her best friend Yu plays the straight man to her goofy doofiness, and this is going to be an adorable slice of life show, all about sleepover parties and rainbow books. And not at all. But in the background of the show, we're constantly being dropped hints that there's really big things happening. Really early on, we get these kind of dark themes, like Yomi goes home and she's talking to somebody over a cup phone, and there's ominous lighting, and we get the impression that she's confined in some way. And one fine day, while Mato is visiting Yomi, we meet Kaguri. Kaguri happens to be the person who's on the cup phone with Yomi in those previous slides, and Kaguri is straight up keeping Yomi under almost house arrest. She's allowed to go to school, but when she comes home, Kaguri wants all her time, all her energy, all her effort, and this causes Yomi a great deal of stress, mental and physical. Now I want to talk about a really interesting scene that happens after tons of emotional abuse on Mato by Kaguri, in the scene where they're visiting. And, during this visit, after all this emotional abuse, we get this scene where Kaguri offers both the girls some colorful macaroons. But she takes a bunch of them out of the box, she gives them to Mato, and she goes, "Here, you get all of the ugly ones. And I want you to go home, because you're ugly, and I don't like that you're friends with my friend." And she makes this face. And you're like, holy bananas, this girl is crazy. But up until this point, there's no real physical interaction. Neither of these girls touches each other. It's all just been belittling and verbal abuse. We get this flip sequence where it transfers to this other dimension, and this is what we get a sense of what Mato feels like, because she doesn't reveal it on her face.
Good morning.
After all that, right? Okay, so that's what it feels like, right? So here we have a really important look into this cool aspect of the show. So like I said, not once do these girls actually interact physically with one another in the real world, but Kaguri's words, all her belittling words, are transferring into this other realm in vicious attack format. All that pain and, all those feelings that Mato is having are being translated into this other world in a way that really makes you cringe. Anyway, Yomi and Mato continue their friendship until Kaguri throws herself down a set of stairs and ends up in the hospital, where she tells Yomi that now she's going to be under permanent house arrest because she's going to have to take care of her all the time. So Mato goes to bust poor Yomi out of the hospital. Kaguri has a complete and utter mental breakdown, and the two girls just start yelling at each other from across a door. Now this part's really important. There's a door in between them. They can't even see each other. They're just full on yelling at one another. And this yelling translates to an ultra showdown in the alternate world, where these two alternate personas of these girls are basically trying to kill one another. As poor Yomi's alternate persona is stuck watching, tied to chains in a chair. So you see how this is translating what's happening in the real world into this other world. So Black Rock Shooter, who happens to be Mato's alternate persona, full-on murders Kaguri's persona. And then we get this scene, where Kaguri just goes blank slate. It's terrifying. After all that screaming and yelling and twitching, she just freezes like this, and then passes out. And in this way, we're beginning to build this understanding of how the real-world encounters are going to translate over to this alternate world we keep getting flashed to. And we, as the viewers, are going to start theorizing about kind of what the alternate personas mean and how they're connected to their real-world counterparts, and what these feelings mean when they translate over. Later in the show, we meet Saya, the middle school guidance counselor, who can only be evil because she gives children coffee in these adorable little cups. But anyway, we further solidify our thoughts that she's evil because when Yomi comes in for depression counseling, like real depression counseling, she does nothing but make it worse. Wow. Like full-on make it worse. Yomi goes home and breaks down. And I just want to describe this scene because when I talked about feelings in the beginning of the show, I said that this show didn't really make me feel good. This was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever seen in an anime. Yomi goes home, there's complete and utter blue lighting in the whole room, and she just mentally falls apart. She gets on the bed, the camera sits in one place, there's this soft music or no music at all, and she just shatters mentally. It is awful to watch, but it sucked me in so hard. How many times have you watched a show that really makes you stop and think and feel that way? We watch so much anime, guys, and it just goes like in one ear and out the other. This made me freeze. I felt like I was intruding on her personal space. And to complement that, in the alternate world, her persona, Dead Master, gets crushed to death by chains. So we have this understanding of how she's feeling, how much she hurts, with no exposition required. It's absolutely brilliant storytelling. So anyway, now we got this all figured out, right? Like, Saya's straight up evil. Mato's straight up the good guy. And now Mato has to take down that evil guidance counselor in her coffee mugs of doom. But it's not nearly that simple, guys. Saya's a very complicated character. She's constantly dropping hints about the other world to all the characters in the real world, giving us the illusion that she kind of knows what's going on at a deeper level. Her alternate persona, Black Gold Saw, is almost nurturing to the other personas in this garden-like area. And no offense, Black Rock's shooter is not exactly the good guy type. She's hostile, she's angry, she shoots things. She killed Kaguri's alternate persona. A really good example of this duality of our characters and how varied they are happens with Kohata, the captain of Mato's basketball team. She's in love with this guy and she confesses to him, and in a stunning pull straight out of Ukna, has her love letter posted on the board for everyone to laugh at. This makes her feel horrible. She goes to Saya for counseling, and Saya does nothing but make it worse. Damn it, Saya. Anyway, while Saya is making it worse in the real world, in the alternate world, Black Gold Saw seems to be very gently guiding this alternate persona into being, which happens to look like a lot like Kohata. So, we're a little confused now, right? Like, what exactly does the alternate world mean? How does the translation from real world to alternate world actually work? Anyway, Black Rock Shooter makes, no bones about that, straight up murders Kohata's alternate persona. There seems to be a trend here. And Saya cries like she's lost a child, cries for herself and for Kohata. She's in enormous amounts of pain because this girl lost her alternate persona. Mato herself is not exactly the goody-goody we expect out of our protagonist. She's on the school's basketball team and she's pretty darn great, but she has no idea how to be a team player. She's very selfish without realizing it. She seems like a nice person, but she hides all of her feelings. She sugarcoats stuff. She guards herself pretty hard. She doesn't like to reveal her feelings. She's very closed. And for somebody so incredibly gentle, who's supposed to be our heroine, why is it that her ultimate persona is straight up vindictive, hostile, and violent towards other personas? What's up with that? Now, this is not the first show that I've seen that tackles really, really big issues like depression, anxiety, and hell, Stockholm Syndrome. But it is the first show that, I felt really did it with this amazing amount of class and subtlety. Every time the girls talk about or deal with something that we know is being reflected in the alternate world, their irises change. They get this gear-like quality. This is consistent throughout the show. So you almost know what's going on in the background by these subtle cues. There's tons of color imagery. You always know who is the person that's the subject in the alternate world because they use the color of her iris to describe what's going on. Color pervades every part of this. There's a lot of imagery going on when we're in the alternate world. What does it actually mean? How does it pertain to what's going on and who is involved? So we're building this alternate world that is just this explosion of color and texture, and it deeply contrasts with the real world, which is very soft and subtle. We get that these two worlds are connected, but they feel totally distinct, yet there's this amazing translation that's going from one to the other. And it's a mystery to us. It's fun to watch and figure out. The alternate personas of the girls are just as much fun to discover. They all look different, they all act different, they're all really fascinating, and it's cool to see who they are and what they describe. I want to talk about the music in the show. This is actually going to be my very first time talking about music in a good show. And I want to talk about the music because it always fits what's going on. Oh, that's... So listening to these, I didn't even really need to give you the text cues. They were more for me than they were for you. You can tell what's going on just by listening to the song that plays in a scene. And what's really cool is that a lot of this music repeats itself. So you can tie yourself to an emotion that goes along with this song, and it's going to repeat at exactly the right spot. It's like they tied the emotion to the music, and it always fits. It really is extraordinary. Now, this is a show starring middle school girls, so I know what you were all afraid of. All those awful things that are in shows with middle school girls. Thankfully, this has none of them. None of them. Like, it's for the fan service. There's no beach hot springs, girls at a sleepover touching one another, episode accidentally, haha, this is funny. There's no filler. This show is 8 episodes long, guys. It knows what the hell it wants to do, and it gets there in an amazing way. So I don't want to spoil anymore, so I'm going to move on to the OVA. I absolutely love the OVA. It actually predates the TV series in terms of its creation, but I don't necessarily recommend you watch it first, because it's a little more abstract, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So the OVA, being, I think, higher budget, certainly looks better. You know, it looks really pretty. Mato definitely looks pretty much like she looked like before. Yomi goes through a major. There's a very different character design for her. The alternate world seems to be defined for the most part, unlike the TV series where it sort of changes based on whatever is actually happening. In the real world, Black Rock Shooter seems to be on a mission this time instead of randomly, enacting violence. She seems to be heading somewhere, everything's sort of defined. And the story is pretty much the same, though, except a lot simpler this time. Mato really wants to be friends with Yomi, and after this adorable scene of, kind of awkwardness, they're pretty much best friends forever. And in the alternate world, while they're becoming best friends, their counterparts are not so much. They find each other, and it seems like they're trying to understand one another in the alternate world. Like, Black Rock Shooter is really seeking to help Dead Master, who is Yomi's persona. And here's the thing, we're never given a clear explanation as to what is exactly going on in the alternate world. You're kind of left to infer what feelings are happening here and why, despite the fact that they're becoming friends in the real world, they're basically trying to kill each other in the alternate world. It's left as a mystery to you to figure out or to decipher it for yourself. And eventually the girls are separated due to classes. Mato is, a fairly social creature. Yomi is not so much. Due to the pain of being left all alone after making a friend for the very first time, Yomi ends up disappearing, actually disappearing. And then all we get is battles in the alternate world, which I don't want to spoil any more shots, but you have to sit and infer what Yomi must be feeling because she's no longer on screen. But clearly these battles are resonating with what she feels and what her emotions are going through. And it's just such a fantastic way of exploring narrative. We're not given this other character to see, we're only given actions which we can infer emotions from. What I think is really cool about the OVA is, like I was saying before, you can watch it, someone else can watch it, and you can interpret it totally different ways. There's no one way, there's no right way to interpret what this is all about and what everything means. I'm not going to spoil any more because I really want you guys to watch it, so we'll just end by talking about the art, which is really nice. They put a lot of energy into everyday things. There's a little bit of that color imagery I was talking about before. It's not as, heavy-handed because the OVA is not as long, obviously. But everything about the show is just so lovingly crafted in this OVA, and you know, the battle sequences look really cool. I honestly should have been longer just for more fight scenes, because damn, they were cool. We'll end on the music, because once again, it always fits. This one is actually a lot more distinct in the OVA. Like in the alternate world, there's always this like really, really heavy, intense music, so you know, like, man, we're drinking it out. And in the real world, it's usually kind of gentle. So we get more of a distinctness between the two worlds and their music this time around. But once again, the music always fits. It's always just perfect for the emotion, for the scene. It's just wonderful. So guys, I know this really looks like one of those things where you're rolling your eyes and you're like, oh no, not that Hatsune Miku thing again. But seriously, the OVA, the TV show for Black Rock Shooter are amazing, and I highly, highly recommend them.
Alright then, I'll be telling you about Millennium Actress. So now, Millennium Actress is not a conventional movie, either by film or anime standards, really. It's kind of a mixture of character drama, history of 20th century Japan, a celebration of Japan's cinema industry, as well as an homage to a lot of different film genres. The movie's true art lies in blending all of these parts, often a lot more skillfully and seamlessly than you'd expect. So the whole thing is framed with these two, the director and the cameraman, and they're busy making a documentary about a famous movie studio that was closed. Now, its star actress, Chiyoko, was someone who basically kept it afloat during most of its history, but she's now retired and they want to know her story. So they go to her house and ask her, and she begins to tell them. So first she kind of sets the stage historically, talking about what things were like at the time, before getting down to, a really important chance meeting with this guy here. Now, he's on the run from the law, which helps him escape, and very quickly becomes infatuated with him as she's talking with him later. He's an anti-government activist whose friends are fighting in Manchuria, and he's a painter. He's going to go help them out there. Well, she's really interested in this, but almost as quickly as he appears, he's gone. The police are relentless, and they're always chasing him, but he's able to make it to the station as she's informed, so she starts rushing to get there. And already we're starting to see this blending that I was talking about. The documentary crew that's filming her almost seems to be able to be there with her in history as her story is happening and to film it. Here she rushes by and her hat falls off, and the director catches it, so I'll try to come back to that later. I bet the two of them were not expecting to do so much running around Tokyo when they were trying to make this film. Anyway, she makes it to the station, but the train is pulling away, and it's too late. Off it goes. And the blending intensifies further as it turns out that he cried at this scene. The cameraman is just as confused as we are, but it's quickly revealed that not only was this her story, it's also one of her movies that she made. It was pretty much the same plot, so we have this mixture of real life and cinema going. And as we return to the present, and he's holding the hat that he caught during the background, I think the cameraman's realization really makes this scene. Anyway, back to her life story. She basically there's a film studio that's trying to scout her, and their next film's in Manchuria. So hey, if the guy's going to Manchuria to help out the rebels, what better way to go see him than to join up at the studio? And so her chase begins. She's just going to follow this guy as much as possible. And what a chase it is, through both real life, as anti-nationalist rebels attack that train in Manchuria, and through movies, such as this feudal Japanese film that she's in here. No matter where she is or what film she's in, she's always chasing after sort of like a man, like a figure that she's trying to get to. And the breadth of film genres they go through is huge. From ninja, like samurai dramas, to courtesan dramas, prison stuff. And as they're doing all of this, they're also kind of showing you how the nature of Japanese film changed alongside history. At the end of the feudal era, through increasing westernization of the country, and into the rise of nationalism, which of course would eventually culminate in the Second World War. Now, after those periods, they transition to the post-war period, and things get a little more difficult for them. At the same time, the kinds of movies that they're making change along with it due to increasing Western influence. And they really reflect this very well in film, through all the different genres we move through. And as the show goes on, we go into futuristic films, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. It's a great homage to all of the different genres, and the love that the movie shows for the history of cinema is evident throughout the film. Now, it's not just a film homage, of course. It's also the story of Shoka chasing after that guy for real. And I'm not going to spoil the story by going into those details. Her life story is woven in with all the movie, as I was hinting at in that train scene. And the film crew, again, seems to be able to be there with her and film everything that happens in her life as she's explaining it. They're almost there filming history, which is a pretty cool effect. Now, the director in particular kind of gets really into it, often inserting himself into bit roles in some of the movies she's played, helping her out, whether it's in these kind of dramas, or as a samurai, a truck driver, on the moon. He's always there helping out. And then there's the cameraman, who kind of adds a humorous note to the entire affair. At the beginning, he's really swept up and kind of worried about the fact that he seems to be there in all these dangerous scenes, probably a lot more than he'd really like. But he's kind of a good sport about it, and he eventually even starts pointing out how absurd the whole weird background filming thing is. At this point, he's informing this guy that, yeah, you're in the wrong costume for the movie we just moved into, you might want to fix that. So I found that to be really good, because when things between the two of them reminiscing really start to get out of hand, and they're obviously having a lot of fun reminiscing, he's there to show you how ridiculous the whole thing is. He adds a grounding in reality to the movie, which might otherwise be too caught up in itself and difficult to follow. His expressions throughout the film are hilarious. I might agree with you there, buddy. Now, there's a lot of this story that I'm not telling you, because it's amazingly well told and it's engaging, and it deserves to be watched in full rather than summarized. But I will say this. If you're like me, you never cry during a movie because men who are as awesome as you don't cry. However, this particular movie's ending always seems to make my eyes sensitive to nearby dust. So, fair warning on that. Now, besides just the story, there's also a lot of other stuff going on that are fantastic in this movie. The soundtrack, for one, which you've kind of been hearing in the background here, is really good. It's full of both these high-energy chase scenes and a lot of calmer retrospective pieces. Then there's the art, like these really well-rendered cabinets or the beams in her house, to this incredibly detailed stuff for the science fiction films, all the way down to very smooth landscapes. And these really interesting, like, almost photorealistic photographs that they occasionally bring out to look at. Also, like, the background of some scenes that are only on screen for a couple of seconds are just beautiful. And the highly stylized stuff as they show sort of the history of film are also really good. But more than anything else, the magazine covers, which I had briefly touched on, are some of the best stuff. Now, all of these covers feature her in a different movie, and throughout the course of the movie, all of these movie genres will be visited by the characters. So all of these, it almost makes it seem like the world is a real thing, like all these movies could have really happened. The care they put into them is amazing. So in general, I want you to give this movie a watch, because it's got great action scenes, it's got great art, really good drama, and film genre homage, of course, especially if you have an interest in Japanese cinema historically or by genre. You can also watch the antics of the film crew, which are pretty funny. This is a way that they really told a great story in an unconventional and engaging method. But more than any of these things, you should watch this movie if you want to see what anime, as an art form, can accomplish. So there are the details.
All right, folks. I hope you are ready for a trip back in time, because it is time for mid-90s OVA theater. Now, it's been a long time since the OVA boom, to the point where the term OVA has become practically synonymous with a DVD-only episode of a broadcast TV show, instead of a feature in its own right. There's a few that still do this sort of thing, but not very many. Now, most of y'all who remember the old days will be quick to point out that for every straight-up awesome piece of work, there were a lot of forgettable or outright terrible offerings. This presentation is about neither of these categories, but about the ones in between that were made with a particular blend of enthusiasm and lunacy. As a brief aside, if you're like me, you don't have any patience for nonsensical shenanigans when they detract from serious business. But if the show doesn't have intense drama or graphic depictions of death or ruminations on the morality of war, I'm all for letting the nonsense roll. Which is why today I'm going to talk to you about a show called Wild Cardz. Anyone? Wild Cardz is a 2-episode OVA that was released in 1997 by the Japanese firm Studio Ox. And its original title is Jaja Uma Quartet, which in the show is a disparaging nickname given to the main characters in the vein of Dirty Pair, their actual title being the Crown Knights. I'm not sure if I can come up with a better localization than Central Park Media here, given that Jaja Uma is a Japanese slang term that literally means untamed horse. Plus, as silly as you think the title Wild Cardz with a Z is, it's probably one that you're going to remember. And it's not a bad match for the silliness inherent in a show that takes place in a game-themed fantasy world. So let's dig right in. After a brief prologue in which our heroines use some of their abilities to put the kibosh on this art thief, the show gives us a brief introduction to the main cast before getting into the real plot. Our heroines are as follows: the super fast Joe Diamond, the strong woman with super senses Casa Clover, the psycho magic user Coco Heartful, whose observed skill set is mostly a blend of Gambit and Jean Grey, and the mysterious Sunday Spade, whose contribution to the team is mostly command and control, both for the Crown Knights themselves and for the city's other mundane but extensive emergency response organizations, all shown here. Now, none of the characters in Wild Cardz are particularly deep, not even the Crown Knights, but the show isn't about probing their psychologies or watching them grow emotionally or anything like that. It's about watching young ladies with bizarre superpowers respond to a sudden crisis. The show proper starts here, with the arrival of a large object that proceeds to wreak havoc through the city. Unable to identify it, the characters are also unable to agree on shorthand for it. Now, the astute will recognize Joe's suggestion, translated as baldy head, to be spoken as Territory Bozu. Though, to be fair, the Bozu part of the Rain Charm's name is essentially slang for bald. And I'll give the translators the benefit of the doubt and assume that they didn't expect general audiences in 1999 to be familiar with these Japanese cultural icons. Anyway, we're trying to figure out what this huge thing that's flying around and breaking stuff, and then a bunch of ninjas show up to defend it. So we gotta deal with them, too. Meanwhile, there's this really difficult to screen cap mystic woman who has some sort of wolf familiar and is hanging around this black marketeer guy who speaks an incredibly irritating forced Chinese accent on both language tracks so that she can manipulate him into ordering his cyborg partner to use their drill ship and its flying modular mahjong tiles to try to take this thing down before the Crown Knights can, for some reason. Well, why not? This type of movie is predicated almost entirely on rule of cool. If the creators thought that something would be awesome, then by golly, it happens. Like this highway turning into a ramp. Dollars to donuts, everyone in the city does that, just in case. So in the first episode, near the end of the first episode, the object changes shape, and Sunday finally identifies it as a giant chess piece, to the genuine shock of everyone on comms. And no sooner does this happen than a giant black knight appears, ridden by this joker, Fracasso, who is apparently a gentleman criminal with the hots for Joe. There's a lot going on here, and almost none of it is clearly explained. I've seen it several times, and I'm not even sure I understand it. But that's part of the fun, and not being sure if you're going to interpret it the same way twice provides some rewatch value, which isn't bad when your show is like 45 minutes long. It's not like it's full of blink-and-you-miss-it details, although there are a handful. And there's something about this scene that I'm having a hard time putting my finger on. That cat girl who's on the monitor for like 2 seconds, she looks familiar. I've got it. That cat girl's from Idol Project, not the card game. Look, for those of you who haven't made it a part of your life's work to find and watch all the anime that were used to create the original dance AMV, Aokikesu Digital's groundbreaking OVA. Idol Project, which is shown here, is a 4-episode OVA that came out between 1995 and 1997 and encompassed the production of Wild Cardz. Basically made by the same company, directed by the same guy, with character designs by the same guy. Big surprise, right? No one else hatches cheeks like that, I guarantee you. Alright, so Idol Project is about this girl here, Mimu Hamilton. And Let me make a brief aside. The guys drawing this show had an absolute blast making the background characters. Let me zoom out to a different shot. They may be simply drawn, but I dare you to find an anime that can match the variety on display here. Anyway, Mibu is embarking on her quest to become a great pop idol, to follow in the footsteps of retired super idol and current Earth president, Yuri. You heard that right. So, the first episode follows Mibu as she navigates the mighty Earth capital of Starland. On her way to the audition, which will determine whether or not she will join the ranks of Yuri's successors. The excellent idol... Aha! I knew it was you! The same ears, the same hair, the same eyes, the same color outfit. They've even got the same voice. Filled with the same manic enthusiasm for whatever it is they happen to be reporting. And it's not just the one announcer. All of the announcers are like catgirl clothes. Yeah. Anyway, so there's 6 of these excellent idols already. We've got Ruka, who's a prodigy actress, Corvette, who's a too-friendly kind of dancer idol. As a brief aside, the dub valiantly translates her regular English outbursts into broken French. I'm not a huge dub fan, but I thought that was pretty clever. We also have Extra, the dignified pianist who is constantly at odds with Layla, a rocking guitarist. And there's Palpu, the laughing kung fu fighter idol, and Shion, the ninja idol. That's a thing? Yeah, that's a thing. Anyway, after Mibu navigates her way through the rabid, uniformed fan bases of all of these other excellent idols, and gleaning an important piece of advice from each of them, she gets to the audition hall, and then, boom, aliens bust in. Kidnap the 7 of them, load them up on their sweet spaceship, and take them to friggin' space. Roll credits. Episode 1. Actually, right before the credits roll, the staff takes a stab at themselves in one of the weirdest ways I've ever seen. They put up handwritten text that translates to, that last scene was the same as Excellions. Damn it! Let me talk to you about Excellion. Excellion exists as a 2-episode OVA released in early 1995 about a green-haired girl named Nagisa, who was recruited by this robot thingy called an Iczer to aid in the battle to keep Earth safe from sinister aliens. Something that, well, you don't really need to know to understand this show, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is that Excellion is actually a loose threequel to a pair of OVAs that came out between 4 and 10 years prior. Fight Iczer 1 and Adventure Iczer 3, whose DVD release was relocalized as Iczer Reborn for obvious reasons. Remember that Excellion actually didn't make it into DVD in the States, even though its 2 predecessors did. Excellion makes reference to its predecessors, panning over the silhouettes of the titular characters. The Iczers themselves are engineered humanoid warriors who are numbered for your convenience, that can dramatically increase their power by synchronizing with a real person. Interestingly, all of the Iczer heroines are green-haired girls named Nagisa. I'm not sure why. Anyway, with a loose trilogy like this one, it's actually possible to trace a tonal shift that took place in the OVA industry from the mid-80s into the mid-90s. With Fight Iczer 1, which came out in 1985, is actually kind of grotesque and brutal. In the first scene, in fact, this random dude pretty much explodes into a hideous alien monster. And this does not happen only once. Fight Iczer 1 takes the devastation of Earth and the traumatization of its heroine way further than a lot of shows that I've seen. Each episode also treats us to a scene of the most powerful weaponry that mankind has at the ready, pretty much getting wrecked. Yes, giant robots. That's an enemy giant robot, and Iczer 1 has its own giant robot, or her own giant robot, although it requires a human as a critical component in its power system. For some reason, a nude human. Who are these bad guys with their hideous monsters and their giant mechs? Well, there's an itinerant race of humanoid aliens called the Cthulhu, or the Cthulhu Wolf, depending on your translation. who have decided to settle on Earth under the direction of the malevolent force Big Gold. During the course of the show, Big Gold develops and deploys Iczer II to oppose Iczer I, and this is where the numbering gap comes from that I alluded to earlier. So you flash forward to 1990 for adventure, Iczer III, which mostly follows the title character, the latest in the Iczer line, obviously, who is sent to Earth to hold the line against evil while Iczer I recovers from fighting this big bad to a standstill in an epic prolonged battle. Now, while the baddies do conquer the surface of the Earth in record time, they're not really in the business of exterminating humanity like the Cthulhu were. Really, they're just holding humanity hostage so that they can draw out Iczer I. So they wreck the entire functioning human military. Iczer III arrives on time only to save a base on the moon where the finishing touches are being put on humanity's latest warship. So, while Fight Iczer I was mostly about two girls trying to make it on their own in a harsh and corrupt world, Adventure Iczer III provides the heroines with a kind of a home and a family of sorts. A little more lighthearted. Iczer III can also summon Iczer Robo, which appears to have had some sort of upgrade, and Nagisa's compartment leaves a little more to the imagination. And then we can move into the mid-90s. With Earth no longer under the threat that requires their direct attention, the Iczers have simplified, miniaturized, and multiplied the whole dual-pilot giant robot setup into intelligent battlesuits, which select humans to synchronize with. And not just one, either. When Nagisa gets recruited, there are already 3 existing Exilians who are indeed preventing destruction from being visited upon Earth rather than reacting to it, as in the earlier OVAs, by undergoing transformation sequences with brief nudity and beating up robo-soldiers when they're not going to school or being pop idols. In fact, the show spends a solid minute and a half on this concert, which is not long after it spends the same amount of time on a techno rave or whatever. It jumps around an awful lot, especially in the second episode, where it tries to keep track of 4 different battles, all taking place in different extra-dimensional battlefields, and it really comes off as disjointed. And for budget constraints or other reasons, the show seems primarily focused on Nagisa's character arc rather than on the actual conflict. And the show ends abruptly after she accepts her new responsibility, mirroring her predecessor's arc from the first 2 episodes of Fight Iczer I, without the whole 3rd episode's actual showdown. So at the end of the 2nd episode, we're all sort of left wondering the same thing that she was wondering at the end of the first one. Full circle. Now, I can tell you exactly what happens to Mimu here. In a move that will offend many of your sensibilities as engineers, the alien's sweet spaceship takes them to the tropical dimension. A universe of water in which lies the resort world Bali, Hawaii. This is a giant bubble with islands on the surface and a star in the middle, which is somehow founded and owned by a large, eccentric fish man. There's that guy in the middle. Except for the sun there only lasts for like 3 years, so he periodically holds this idol contest made up of a bunch of BS beach sports, and the winner gets to raise a new sun by playing music to a giant oyster. I wish I could come up with something this bizarre. And now that we're not even close to Earth, all bets are off in terms of character designs. I'll not spoil the show for you. Suffice it to say that after it wraps this episode up, there's a bit of a time skip at the midpoint of the OVA. So we'll transition to the 2nd disc and pick up a few weeks later on planet Wallyhood, where Mimu and the excellent idols are trying to pay their way back to Earth. We even cut to this Corvette on this whacked-out game show just in time to hear her make an obvious reference to her own voice actress. Which makes this an opportune time to mention that we're dealing with an all-star cast of accomplished vocalists, among them, almost all of whom had done or would go on to do great things. Albu's Seiyu is the only one that doesn't have a lot of singing credits, but I've got my eye on her for other reasons. And I like Shiyu's Seiyu because she's not only risky from risky safety, she's also safety from risky safety. even just them. Like, Yuri's got a good resume, as does this bit character who doesn't even have any intelligible lines. And damn it, Cat Girl. I already did Excellion. We're on Mollywood now. This freaking jerk aliens don't have the decency to return abductees to their own planet. Gosh. Now, as a fair warning, I feel like the animators cranked up the fan service in this episode. Just to say that we haven't been doing pratfalls into panty shots for the entire show up to this point, or that we didn't spend most of last episode cavorting around in skimpy swimsuits. But by today's standards, I think most of it is pretty tame. Most of it. Let's see, as part of the emerging overplot, we get this little twerk here, which is not really significant and can be safely ignored without losing anything of real value. Instead, we can pay attention to Palpu, who spends most of the episode stealing the show. She steals it so hard she has her own show in the show. With opening credits and everything. I'm not familiar enough with the genre to pick out everything that's getting parodied here, although some gags are more obvious than others. And the nonsense doesn't stop there. In fact, even as the final plot line moves into prominence, the nonsense pretty much just doesn't stop. At all. It does not stop. It gets to the point where down left, up left, and is that the DVD menu? There's no escape from that cat girl. Alright? Dang, girl. Oh, come on! Get out of there. That's great, bud. Alright. So, an additional note about wildcards is that this thing is dirt cheap. Shipping's like $4, so if you can find a better anime for $5, you buy it. And you let us know where we can get some of that. Until next year, this is mid-90s OVA Theater. Now, do you want to see any more of these shows that we went through up here? Yeah. Come down here and give you some flyers. All right.
Yep, we've written up all the shows and their details so you can find them later. Come and get yourself one of these.